Breaking. Benjamin Netanyahu just blindsided Keir Starmer with a move so devastating that Number 10 is calling it a national humiliation. What the Israeli Prime Minister did 47 minutes ago has triggered a cabinet meltdown, emergency UN meetings, and riots in 3 British cities. And what happened next could end Britain's Middle East influence forever. If you want to see how this constitutional crisis destroys Starmer's government, hit that subscribe button right now, because what we're about to reveal will shock you to your core. Here's what sparked the worst diplomatic catastrophe in modern British history. Yesterday at 2:15 p.m, Keir Starmer addressed Parliament about Britain's so-called balanced approach to the Gaza conflict. His words were carefully calculated, diplomatically neutral, designed to offend nobody. Britain stands with international law, Starmer declared, his face stern and serious. We support Israel's right to defend itself while demanding humanitarian access to Gaza. The usual political dance, the standard talking points, the kind of speech that sounds important but says absolutely nothing. But Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't having it. The Israeli Prime Minister wasn't looking for diplomatic pleasantries or carefully worded statements. Netanyahu did something completely unprecedented instead. At exactly 9:47 a.m. Israeli time, he held an emergency press conference in Jerusalem, stood before a wall of international flags, and systematically dismantled everything Keir Starmer represents. His exact words were chilling and calculated for maximum damage. Netanyahu's voice was steady but dripping with contempt as the cameras rolled. Britain lectures us about international law while abandoning the very principles that kept the free world safe for 80 years. Prime Minister Starmer speaks of balance, but there is no balance between democracy and terrorism, between civilization and barbarism. His government has chosen a side, and history will remember their betrayal. The response was swift and devastating across 3 continents. Within minutes, Israeli officials pulled Britain's ambassador into what one source described as the most hostile diplomatic meeting in 30 years. Dame Harriet Matthews, Britain's highly respected ambassador to Israel, emerged from the Foreign Ministry building in Tel Aviv looking visibly shaken. Diplomatic sources who witnessed her departure describe her hands trembling as she entered her official vehicle. One Israeli official who attended the meeting revealed that Netanyahu's senior advisors presented her with a dossier, a thick folder containing what they claim is documented evidence of British duplicity spanning 6 months. The contents of that dossier haven't been made public yet, but the threat was clear: cooperate or we release everything. Within hours, the hammer fell harder across multiple fronts simultaneously. According to senior Foreign Office insiders who spoke on condition of anonymity, Netanyahu's government is now blocking British intelligence sharing on Iran, freezing joint military exercises scheduled for next month, and worst of all, briefing American officials that Britain can no longer be trusted as a reliable ally in the Middle East or beyond. Sources inside the Pentagon describe Netanyahu painting Starmer as weak, unpredictable, and dangerously sympathetic to extremist causes. One Washington insider used the phrase persona non grata to describe how American military planners now view the British Prime Minister. The special relationship that survived world wars and countless crises is fracturing before our eyes. And here's what makes it worse. American intelligence agencies are reportedly considering downgrading Britain's security classification level, which would mean reduced access to classified information about threats facing both nations. Think about what that means. Britain could lose access to critical intelligence about terrorism, about nuclear threats, about the very information that keeps British citizens safe at night. Meanwhile, British veterans who fought for democracy across the Middle East are watching their legacy destroyed by politicians playing moral games they don't understand. James Patterson, a 1-year-old former Royal Marine from Plymouth who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, stood outside Parliament yesterday with tears streaming down his face. We bled for those alliances, he told reporters, his voice breaking with emotion. We lost brothers building those relationships with Israel, with America, with the democratic world. And now Starmer throws it away for what? For votes? For political correctness? His hands were shaking as he spoke, clutching a photo of fallen comrades taken in Basra in 2004. Patterson isn't alone in his fury and sense of betrayal. The Royal British Legion issued an unprecedented statement yesterday, expressing deep concern about the government's foreign policy direction. Afghanistan veterans who fought alongside Israeli special forces in joint counter-terrorism operations describe feeling betrayed by a government that doesn't understand sacrifice. Colonel Marcus Webb, retired from the Special Air Service, told GB News that Starmer's diplomatic incompetence dishonours everyone who wore the uniform in defence of democratic values. While men like James and Marcus suffer the consequences of moral cowardice, Labour MPs enjoy luxury dinners with pro-Palestinian lobby groups who donate millions to their campaigns. We're talking about ministers photographed at fundraisers hosted by organisations with documented ties to Hamas sympathisers. Shadow cabinet members accepting donations from groups that refuse to condemn the October 7th attacks. The contrast is so outrageous, so fundamentally wrong, that even traditional Labour voters are turning away in disgust. Margaret Foster, a 68-year-old retired nurse from Newcastle who voted Labour her entire life, recorded a video that's now been viewed 1.8 million times. "I didn't vote for this," she said, her voice trembling with rage and betrayal. "I voted for strong leadership, for British values, for standing with our democratic allies. Instead, we got a Prime Minister who insults Israel and bows to extremists." Her video has become a rallying cry for disillusioned Labour supporters across Britain. The comment section is filled with thousands of similar stories, lifelong Labour voters describing the moment they realised their party had abandoned them. Teachers, nurses, factory workers, the backbone of Labour's traditional base, all expressing the same sentiment. We don't recognise our party anymore. Then something unprecedented happened that nobody saw coming, and that has constitutional experts talking about the gravest crisis since Suez. King Charles broke 70 years of royal protocol and intervened directly in the diplomatic catastrophe. At yesterday's Commonwealth Veterans Association ceremony at Buckingham Palace, he delivered what observers are calling the most politically charged speech of his reign. The carefully chosen words were devastating in their precision. "As we honour those who serve," Charles declared with visible emotion cutting through his normally measured tone, "we must remember that true friendship is tested not in times of peace but in moments of crisis. Abandoning democratic allies in their darkest hour is not diplomacy, it is moral failure." The room fell silent. Veterans stood straighter. Several wiped away tears. And every political observer understood immediately that the king had just publicly rebuked his own prime minister in language that left no room for misinterpretation. Palace insiders reveal the king personally rewrote that speech 3 times, removing softer language each time, making it sharper and more pointed. Senior royal aides who spoke off the record described Charles as genuinely furious, more angry than they've seen him since ascending the throne. One advisor used the word livid to describe the king's reaction when briefed on Netanyahu's public condemnation. But here's what hasn't been reported yet, and this is absolutely critical to understanding the full scale of this crisis. Multiple palace sources confirm that King Charles personally contacted Israeli President Isaac Herzog the morning after Netanyahu's statement. The call lasted 7 minutes, far longer than standard diplomatic courtesy requires. What was discussed remains classified, but the symbolism alone is devastating for Starmer. When your monarch bypasses you to maintain relationships with foreign leaders, when the constitutional head of state essentially conducts his own foreign policy because yours has failed so catastrophically, you've lost all credibility as a national leader. The optics are absolutely catastrophic for Starmer and his collapsing government. When your own monarch publicly rebukes your foreign policy, when the constitutional head of state suggests you've committed moral failure, you're not just in political trouble, you're finished. Immediate market and economic impact hit Britain like a hammer within hours of Netanyahu's statement. The pound dropped 1.8% against the dollar in 90 minutes of chaotic trading. £3.2 billion was wiped from London Stock Exchange valuations by market close. Currency traders in the city describe panic selling as investors lose confidence in British political stability. Major British corporations with Israeli operations are now facing boycott threats from both sides. Tech firms that rely on Israeli cybersecurity partnerships are scrambling to protect relationships. Financial institutions are quietly moving Middle East operations from London to Dubai and Frankfurt. One senior banker at Barclays, who spoke anonymously, described the exodus as the beginning of a brain drain that could take decades to reverse. Political party fractures opened immediately as Labour MPs began turning on their own leader with unprecedented speed and viciousness. Rebecca Long-Bailey broke ranks first, telling Channel 4 News that Starmer's approach lacks moral clarity and damages Britain's standing. Within 3 hours, 7 more Labour MPs issued statements distancing themselves from government policy. International reactions poured in with devastating speed and consequences that extend far beyond the Middle East. The White House issued what diplomatic sources describe as an ice-cold statement praising Israel's commitment to democratic values, while conspicuously refusing to mention Britain at all. That silence spoke volumes to anyone who understands Washington politics. French President Macron called Netanyahu directly to reaffirm France's unwavering support for Israel, a move seen as deliberately excluding Britain from European consensus. Germany's Chancellor Scholz gave a speech in Berlin that praised Germany's special relationship with Israel, while noting that some traditional allies have lost their moral compass. Italy's Prime Minister Meloni tweeted support for Netanyahu, adding that true allies don't waver when tested. Social media exploded as #BritainBetrayed trended globally for 11 consecutive hours. Poll numbers released this morning show the full scale of Starmer's catastrophic miscalculation. A Snap Ipsos Mori survey shows 68% of Britons believe the government has damaged relations with Israel. 71% say Starmer is weak on national security. And most devastatingly, 54% of previous Labour voters now say they regret their choice. Protests erupted across Manchester, Birmingham and London yesterday evening, with thousands demanding Starmer's immediate resignation. The Manchester protest outside the Labour Party headquarters turned particularly heated when police had to separate pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian factions who began fighting in the streets. Inside number 10 Downing Street, the atmosphere has become absolutely toxic, according to multiple government sources who describe it as worse than anything witnessed during the final days of Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. Ministers are at each other's throats. Shouting matches echo through corridors that once housed Churchill and Thatcher. Foreign Secretary David Lammy allegedly slammed a door so hard during a cabinet meeting that security guards rushed in thinking there was an attack. Defence Secretary John Healey was overheard telling colleagues that Starmer's handling of this crisis is the most incompetent foreign policy disaster he's witnessed in 30 years of politics. One junior minister who resigned yesterday described the cabinet room as resembling a war zone, with ministers refusing to make eye contact, others typing furiously on phones instead of engaging, and Starmer himself sitting stone-faced and silent as his government crumbled around him. WhatsApp groups with names like Save the Party and Emergency Response Unit are plotting openly about leadership challenges and emergency confidence votes. The question isn't if they'll move against Starmer, it's when and who leads the coup that everyone now sees as inevitable. Rachel Reeves has gone suspiciously quiet, refusing all interview requests, cancelling public appearances, meeting privately with backbench MPs in what everyone recognises as preparation for a leadership bid. She's been photographed entering the homes of influential MPs at unusual hours. Her team is making calls, testing support, building coalitions. Angela Rayner looked physically ill at yesterday's cabinet meeting. Sources say she barely spoke and spent most of the session staring at her phone, presumably reading the cascading bad news and calculating her own political survival. Veterans inside Westminster who've seen governments rise and fall describe this as worse than anything they remember, worse than the Brexit chaos, worse than the expenses scandal. A complete breakdown of party discipline and governmental authority happening in real time. But here's the twist that could trigger Starmer's final collapse and destroy Labour's credibility for a generation. Leaked Foreign Office documents show something that, if confirmed, would constitute the greatest betrayal in modern British diplomatic history. According to papers obtained by The Telegraph, senior Labour officials met secretly with Palestinian Authority representatives in Doha 3 weeks before the October 7th attacks, discussing potential recognition of Palestinian statehood over Israeli objections. The leaked documents, stamped confidential and dated September 14th, detail 3 separate meetings involving Labour's Middle East policy advisor, Jonathan Ashworth, and senior Palestinian officials. If these documents are real, and if they show what multiple intelligence sources now claim, then Starmer's government wasn't pursuing balanced diplomacy. They were actively undermining Israel weeks before the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Think about what that means when spelled out in plain English. British ministers potentially knew tensions were escalating, potentially had advance warning of instability, and instead of supporting a democratic ally, they pursued back-channel deals that weakened Israel's strategic position. The optics of that would be absolutely devastating and constitute grounds for immediate resignation, if not criminal investigation. Parliamentary committees are already demanding the full disclosure of those meetings. Conservative MPs are calling for a special inquiry. And Netanyahu's team has let it be known through intermediaries that Israel possesses recordings of those conversations that they're prepared to release if Britain continues what they call hostile diplomatic posturing. The recordings allegedly contain explicit discussions about timing Palestinian recognition to maximize pressure on Netanyahu's government. If those recordings become public, if the British people hear their government actively conspiring against a democratic ally, Starmer won't just lose his position. He could face criminal charges for violations of diplomatic protocol and potentially even treason for conspiring with foreign entities against British interests. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak and the Conservative opposition are capitalising on Labour's implosion with surgical precision and devastating effect. While Starmer struggles to control his own cabinet, Sunak appeared on every major broadcast yesterday, looking calm, measured and prime ministerial. When Britain had Conservative leadership, he declared with quiet confidence that cut through the chaos, we stood firmly with democratic allies. We didn't equivocate. We didn't betray friendships forged in blood. We understood that moral clarity matters. The polls tell the story of a political earthquake reshaping British politics. Conservatives have surged to 38%, their highest level in 2 years. Labour has collapsed to 29%, losing 9 points in just 5 days. For the first time since the disastrous election, Sunak's personal approval ratings now exceed Starmer's by 12 points. The British public is watching a Prime Minister self-destruct, and they're ready for change. Conservative campaign headquarters has already designed attack ads featuring Netanyahu's condemnation alongside images of British veterans, asking one devastating question: who do you trust to defend Britain? Sunak isn't just campaigning for the next election, he's positioning for a snap election that could come within months if Labour's collapse continues at this pace. The next 72 hours are absolutely critical for Britain's future and may determine whether this government survives the week. Netanyahu is scheduled to address the US Congress tomorrow, where sources say he plans to publicly name Britain as an unreliable partner. The UN Security Council meets Thursday to discuss Gaza, where Britain faces the humiliating prospect of being isolated from both Israel and America. Labour's National Executive Committee convenes Friday. Amid rumours of an emergency leadership challenge, street protests are planned for Saturday in 15 cities, with organisers predicting the largest demonstrations since the Iraq War. The question is no longer whether Starmer can survive this diplomatic catastrophe. It's whether Labour can survive Starmer before he drags the entire party into oblivion. Britain is watching its international reputation collapse in real time, while a weak Prime Minister hides behind talking points and refuses to take responsibility. This crisis will be studied for decades as the moment when British foreign policy credibility died because one man chose political correctness over strategic alliances. At its epicenter stands Keir Starmer, who looks increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, and increasingly finished as a credible national leader. So, Here's the question that matters to every British voter watching this catastrophe unfold. Does Starmer survive this betrayal, or is his career over? Did Netanyahu just end Labour's government with 12 devastating minutes in Jerusalem? Or will the British public forget this humiliation like they've forgotten so many political scandals before? What do you think happens next? Does King Charles intervene again? Do Labour MPs finally find the courage to remove their failing leader? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your voice matters in holding these politicians accountable. And if this story shocked you as much as it shocked us, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening in Westminster right now. The mainstream media won't tell you the full truth about this diplomatic disaster, but we will. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because tomorrow we're releasing leaked audio from inside that emergency cabinet meeting. What you'll hear will prove this government is finished.